Lewis, who was himself a great athlete in his time, says, if you don't have confidence, you'll always find a way not to win. All right? Always find a way not to win. How many of you here perhaps are just overcome by the negatives? You feel that, well, I can't do it. I mean, there's no point even trying. But you recognize that if you took a positive view of your own talents, your own ability, and the contribution which you can make, then you'd be forever trying. You'd be forever trying. Because the characters in history that you recognize and admire so much did not do it just easy so. They had to overcome many, many difficulties. They fell down and they got up again. They suffered their reversals and they were prepared to move on. Such was their confidence, such was their courage. And I pray to God that in you and among you here this morning are confident young people, courageous young people who believe that, yes, I can make a difference. Yes, all is not lost. I'm prepared to do my best. And I believe that in doing my best, there are others who will follow my example. The last section of this I want to speak on has to do with self-liberation. How do we overcome all of the terrible, terrible negatives of slavery and of colonialism? How do we do that? You have to recognize that the aim of slavery was to dehumanize people. In fact, they did not really regard them as people. They wanted to rob them of their very humanity. They wanted to use them as if they were just animals for the work that they can do and the labor that they could provide. And so they did everything possible. They robbed them of their religion. They robbed them of their culture. And they told them, well, that was inferior. That was barbaric. They were trying to, rob these people of the very the very essence, if you will, of humanity. That's what they were trying to do. And I'm saying again, my brothers and sisters, that attitude will not just go away because you ignore it. Because you ignore what the slave masters tried to do over 200 years. Because you ignore it, it is not just going to go away. We have to have a positive strategy in order to overcome all of those negatives. These were people who felt that, listen, Massa knows best, and therefore you're not expected to think, even though you had a brain. These are people who tried what was known as divide and rule. Keep them divided. Play one off against the other. I'm saying these are the tools which the slave owners used in their time. We have to recognize them as what they are, what they were at the time, and what they are still. Because what is truly troubling about modern Caribbean society, including St. Kitts society, is that so many of the tools which were employed by the slave owners continue to be used today. Instead of striving for unity, we are using division. Instead of empowering people and getting them to understand that, listen, your destiny is in your hand. God has given you gifts and talents, and it is for you to develop those gifts and talents. It is as if you're to remain dependent. And not surprisingly, there are things which some people do not wish to do for themselves. They want the government to do this or somebody else to do it. And that kind of dependency is not healthy. But these are all born out of a slave society. So the big challenge now The big challenge now is how do we try to liberate our minds? I think this is all part of the process. Unless you know your history, unless you can take pride in it, unless you have a strong sense of self, your own worth, your own dignity, then you're just going to be, swept along by events. But if you have a sense of your own worth, your own importance, that you have a particular role, that God has put you in this world for a purpose. You have a purpose. You have a destiny. And it is important for you to work in order to develop those talents and those gifts and those graces. Marcus Garvey, I'd say the last word to him. Marcus Garvey, remarkable man, and you have to read what he said. You have to read what others who understood him have said, and not to read what the oppressors said about him, because most of them would say, well, he was a racketeer, he was this, he was that, he was the other. But the man had such tremendous vision, because what he wanted to do was to bring about a unification of the entire African race. And to the extent that that could not be accommodated in the West, in the United States, that is why he talked about going back to Africa. So that in Africa, they would be able to promote the spirit of racial pride and love. How we need that. A sense of, a spirit of racial pride and love. Somebody has said that of all the terrible things which slavery did to our ancestors, perhaps the worst thing which it has done is to leave us with a sense of self-hatred. Anybody here hate yourself? Do you hate yourself? Do you hate yourself? Or do you love yourself? From your hair, your nose, your lips, right down? Because you see, you got to be careful. You've got to be very careful, because they tell me that a few $1 billion are spent by black people in the United States to do something about their hair, their looks, their whatever else. So now, if you love yourself, why is it you're spending so much money on wanting to be somebody else or to look in a different way? Alright? So, we have to watch that. We have to love ourselves for who we are. We have to love our brothers and sisters and not be guilty of this, what has become known as black on black crime, where black people killing, their own brothers and sisters as if they were flies, having no respect for them, no reverence for life. This is the message which I think Marcus Garvey was trying to get across. And he had the vision that, listen, if only I could raise the money, if only I can buy these wonderful ships and establish the Black Star Line, then our people will be going back home. And in that home of Africa, they will be able to demonstrate to the rest of the world something of what Africa was in the early days, when Africa was the cradle of civilization. That was his vision. And so Marcus Garvey was the one who said, in terms of advocating the liberation of our minds, he said, I quote, "We have outgrown slavery, but our minds are still enslaved to the thinking of the master race. Now, take the kinks out of your mind instead of out of your hair." It's a mind. It's a mind. It's a mind. It's a mind. We need to liberate our minds. And as Bob Marley would have said, none but ourselves can free our minds. We got to do it. Because we have to recognize that those negative ideas about inferiority and those negative ideas of dependency and those negative ideas of divisiveness, they are the ones holding us back. The distrust which we have for each other. We're not prepared to trust each other. We don't love each other, and that is why you have all of these terrible, terrible, terrible murders. Because there's so much hatred. So let us end on a positive note. I'm saying that slavery is evidence of man's inhumanity to man. Black people were not enslaved because they came out of Africa or because they were inferior. That is not the case. If white people were available, they would abuse white people. If white people were as strong physically as black people were, because as you know, the Amerindians were tried here in the Caribbean before the Africans came. Europeans came out and many of them died off, tropical diseases of one sort or another. But the Africans were strong, not only physically, but spiritually. Whenever I go up to Brimstone Hill, I take a little time just to reflect on the wonder of it all. Because the cannons, the stones, how did they get up there? It was thanks to the strength and the stamina and the determination of black people. In the hot sun, with the whips on their back. And it was not just a matter of physical strength. You look at the architecture of Brimstone Hill today and you recognize that our people were not just strong, but our people were skillful. They had skills, they had knowledge, they had a mind. Look around you and you'll recognize that we are not second class to anyone. We have the same talents, we have the same abilities, but so much depends on us. Whether we are able now to liberate our minds and in the process, to realize our full potential as a people. That is the challenge. I believe you can do it. I believe you can do it. And I believe that this series of lectures might well be the turning point when the high school students of St. Kitts begin to say, well, you know, I have to see myself differently. I have to see myself differently. I have to see my brother and my sister differently. I have to show more love. I have to show more reverence. I have to work for unity by showing that, yes, I care about my brother and my sister. I believe that it can be done. And take my word, I have confidence in you. Thank you.
Any questions from anyone in the audience? Please show your hand and we will have you the question.
There were many methods used to control the slaves. One in which is keep the body physically strong but psychologically depending on the slave master, which again could be interpreted as keep the body strong but take the brain. Do you think that this method is still effective in the black society today?
That's a very, very profound question. And I'll begin to answer that question by referring to something which in history is called the Willie Lynch letter. Yes. Oh, you've heard about Willie Lynch letter? Now, bear in mind that there are some people who doubt the authenticity of the letter. There are some people who say, no, it was not written by Willie Lynch in 1712. It was written sometime later by somebody else. Now, if it was in fact written by Willie Lynch in 1712, you're going to find that next year is what? How many years? How many years? How many years? 1712 to 2012. 1712 to 2012. 300 years. I know we have mathematicians among us, right? And so, what is remarkable is that in that letter, in describing the tools which he was recommending for keeping slaves in subjection, he said, well, keep them divided. Keep them divided. Use a house slave against the field slave. Use those with a little straight hair against those with the natty hair. Use every conceivable division you can, and you're going to find that if you do that, and he actually said it, he said you'd be able to keep these people in subjection for 300 years. I'd encourage you to read it and come to your own conclusion. Because if you look at it, you're going to find that many of the tools, many of the methods which were used in slavery are still being practiced today. That's the honest truth. So I thank you for your question.
You spoke about the first slave revolt happening, I think it's in 1639, I think. I would like to know where I can find some information on that so I can do some further reading.
I hope I have the date right, but I'm pretty certain it was 1639. The first source I would recommend is the Heritage, what used to be Heritage Society, the National, the St. Christopher Trust. What used to be Heritage Society at the Treasury Building, I'm sure they have literature on it. I recall getting from them a pamphlet a few years ago giving specifics, of the particular slave revolt. Right? The point of that, I'm not advocating rebellion and revolt and riots. Okay? I'm not advocating that. But I'm saying that, as early as then, not in Jamaica, not in Barbados, not anywhere else, it was in St. Kitts. And I'm saying there's something about the soil and the environment of St. Kitts that seemed to bring that out in our people, starting way back in 1639. We come on down to 1834. We had problems in 1896. And the people were so bold, so brave, nothing could hold them back. There are reports indicating that after 1896, you had the 1935 riots, and the day following the Tuesday, the main events took place on the Monday. The Tuesday, it's recorded officially that there were women taunting the police and taunting the defense force, telling them, shoot me now, nothing in your